Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Velero Community Meeting and Open Discussion. Today is July 21st, 2020, and per usual, we're going to start with some status updates and then dive into the discussion topics. First off, we have Ashish.
Hey everyone. For me, last week I was getting the 1.4.2 release tested and all good to go. And I think we cut the release, or we did cut the release last week. So if you get a chance, please try it out, or please try it out because it has a critical bug fix with respect to backup and restore of CRDs. Other than that, I was doing PR reviews and GitHub issue investigations. Don't have much to report on those yet. One of the things that I found missing while investigation was metrics related to restic. So I put up a PR to help us add more metrics into restic. So that is that PR linked in the HackMD. So please do take a look if you are interested. Other than that, I don't have anything else on my list.
The metrics here, do they tie into the progress report that we've been working on as well?
No, these are metrics like Prometheus metrics exposed while backups are running or while the server is running backups and restores. We have metrics inside of core Velero, but we don't have anything from restic. So we are pretty much flying blind there. If something happens, we just have to dig in and come up with a hypothesis and try to prove it. So these metrics kind of give us some visibility there.
Okay, and these would be stored so they can be historic metrics as well, not just current metrics? Or?
Yes, you would need to have Prometheus or something like that. Mostly Prometheus running, to which is like a time series database for metrics.
Awesome. Any questions, comments on this? All right. Thank you, Ashish. Next up, we have Nolan.
I'm also working on PR reviews. We got the restore hooks. I not specifically added there, but that is not what I meant to link there. But I meant to link a ZenHub view of the work, but basically all issues labeled with the restore hook label now. Are the broken down work that we have from the restore hooks design document that we can move on work now. That's the first PR that I'm kind of trying to roll with. There's a few like prerequisite work things that could be rolled into the larger work, stuff like adding the annotation definitions and modifying the restore spec and things like that. But I did that breakdown yesterday. So folks that are interested in grabbing that, those PRs are up there now, or those issues are up there now, and they're labeled with the restore hook label. So there should be easy to find. If you want to grab it, you can grab one and assign yourself. And maybe ping me on Slack to let me know you're working on it. But I'm checking the GitHub pretty regularly. We also merged the insensitive language PRs on late Friday, and what that means for people on the call is the master branch is no longer being used. We are now using main So the master branch is still around for right now, but it will rapidly be going out of date. We're not merging new PRs into that. And documents will be on, documentation will be on the main branch. There's one file for the style guide, and that I have a PR open to move it and get rid of master completely. But we got the Helm chart and the plugins moved as well. So that was all wrapped up Friday. Also last week, I started a design document for the DeleteAction plugins. So this will delete any resources. It basically allows a plugin author to take an action when Velero deletes a Velero backup. So please take a look at that design document and make comments. It's in draft right now, but definitely looking for feedback there. And then I have two small PRs that are pretty, I think they should be easy to review. One of them is that moving that style guide, and one of them is getting the 1.4.2 changelog merged into main. And I'm on community support this week. So I think that's most of what I got for this meeting.
Awesome, thank you. Any questions, comments for Nolan?
I just wanted to comment that I'll probably take one of those restore hooks issues, small ones, and try it out today.
Cool, thanks.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and I also commented on the design doc PR with the ZenHub web app link that shows like dependencies and stuff that I mapped out there. So that has yeah, I will fix this link in just a sec, but this has the ZenHub should have blockers and things like that. Yeah. Yeah, that's the looking at that, that's the link with the browser plugin. So I'll fix that while we're getting the next update. But thank you, Andrew. Very much appreciate that.
All right, any other questions, comments for Nolan? Okay, next up we have Carlisia.
Hello. I will look at those two PRs right after this, Nolan. I was on community support last week. I worked on, so I just wanted to let everyone know we do have a backup storage location controller now that constantly checks if the storage is valid or not. So right now I'm working on converting the serverStatusRequest controller to controller-runtime. It's done. I just have one passkey test to figure out. I should have a PR for that today. So I have, let me see, two more controllers that we agreed to do for 1.5. So another thing too, in regards to this controller conversion, is that once these controllers are all converted, we won't need to use the client Go stuff. So that means we won't have to generate them, which means pretty much all of the relevant CI make targets that we have, they're going to run much faster. I don't know how it is for everybody else. For me, on my machine, it takes forever. Every time I have to make updates, make verify, make CI, it just takes forever because it has to generate all of that. So I'm looking forward to that. what else? So there is, so I helped someone yesterday and still helping him today. There's a tiny bug on the generate script that I introduced, but I fixed. I mean, I found out what it is. It's not much of a big deal, but I'm also verifying the behavior for the verify make targets, because as it is now, I don't know if I introduced this or not. I need to check out a branch before my introduction to the cube builder stuff, because I touched all of these script files. But the way it is now, when we run make updates, we have to git add the files, because otherwise the git verify will check out the CRD's file. I don't know if it was always like this or not. That's what I'm trying to figure out. So if you don't git add, you get into a loop that you run make CI verifies, checks out the CRDs.go file, and then tells you to make updates. You run make updates, you generate that file, and then you just get into this loop. Anyway, and this takes forever. So gosh, it's so super simple, but just running these make targets, because it generates all of those files. It's kind of making me upset. And we started filling out an FAQ page, and everybody's also welcome to contribute to that. That's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you, Carlisia. Any questions, comments?
Thanks for starting that FAQ, Carlisia. It's great.
Carlisia, do you have a link to the PR to fix the verify thing? I'm curious to know what the fix is or why the problem exists in the first place.
Yeah, I have a tiny bug, which was the checkout, the git checkout was pointing to the bases where the manifests are instead of the crds.go file, which is,
okay.
Yeah, that's it. I don't have a PR because I'm trying to verify if the scripts, the way they are now, is the same as they were before I touched them.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out the behavior. I mean, I already have one solution that I have for this is just to add tags to when you run make CI and it tells you, oh, run make update. I'm going to add run make update and add the generated files, just so people know
that's what is expected, right? So people update and then commit the changes, and that way next time verify runs, it will detect no changes and it should be fine.
So this is that's what I want to confirm, that this is the normal behavior. But if we don't, I think if we don't say something like git add your files, if people don't git add the files, they're like, what's happening? Because
just saying run make update and not make them commit those changes. It's I get that. Okay.
Yeah. So, but I don't have there's definitely going to be a PR to fix the path. It may be just this additional instruction. I think that might be it. I just want to be super sure that I didn't introduce anything else. I mean, I didn't introduce anything that changed the behavior.
Cool.
I had a question on the FAQ page. So for this page, what is the relationship between where we're doing the FAQs here and the FAQs on the doc site? And how, like, what goes where? That's
a great question, Abby. So we talked about this before, and I think I was trying to make a case, and I'm pretty sure everybody agreed that it's a lot easier to dump text on this wiki than on the website. The website, you have to open a PR, have the PR reviewed, have the PR merged. So the intention for this is questions that are very useful or very frequent on the Kubernetes Slack that we get from users. It would be helpful for us to just dump them here real quickly. And so what do we do with the FAQ page that's on the website? That is the question. I think we should put those questions and answers here as well. Keep the link, keep that FAQ on the table of content and just add a link. What do you think?
I think that would work. Like keep the one that's in the GitHub wiki as like the main FAQ page, and then just have a link to it from the doc site. Is that what you said we're saying? Yeah, I think that makes sense. The most sense. If whatever is going to be the most up to date, continuously updated would be the best place to link to.
I can scrap the questions and answers from that page and add a link and do that.
Yeah, I would prefer to just have one.
Yeah, we should only have one.
Sounds great. Any other questions, comments for Carlisia? All right, Stephanie.
All right, so just one thing to mention right before we dive into this is you'll notice with, for example, the restic annotation improvements, as well as the restore hooks, that the design was done a little bit before the product requirements. And in some cases, you know, due to the really fantastic engagement we have from our community members, design documents may be in draft phase or kind of started. But the goal of the product requirements markdown files that we're creating is to make sure that when we get to the point where we're scoping the work, that we have the product requirements document for reference on what the scope is for that specific epic. And if we need to create an epic for some future scope, we'll be tracking it that way on the Zen Hub. So just wanted to make sure to let everybody know what the markdown file purpose is and the purpose of those product requirements documents. And also in the future, we're moving towards trying to get the product requirements ahead of the design documents. So just to let everyone know that. But on the topic of restore hooks specifically, so we've got the document, the draft was created. Nolan, thanks very much for the review that you provided. We also had a review from some internal folks here at VMware, and we want to make sure that we let everyone know that this doc is available for review. It's linked to the HackMD notes, so please feel free to take a look, comment, and ask questions. You'll also see a lot of the comments in the markdown file itself that I'll talk about in a little more detail during the discussion section. Because there are one or two use cases that we just need to kind of touch on this morning. That's it for my status.
Perfect. And you wanted to do a deep dive into this?
Yeah, if we're ready.
Yeah, any questions, comments before we do that?
I was going to say I have been meaning to look at this, but I haven't had a chance to, but I will today. But this deep dive is also going to be useful.
Thanks, Ashish.
And I also want to say, like, these use cases are going to be super helpful for like clarifying like what we're trying to do with things, like what we're trying to accomplish with stuff. I also don't want to discourage anyone in the community from submitting a design document if they've got something they really want to do. Like, it's not meant to be a barrier for community folks. This is meant to just clarify things we're trying to accomplish. So we're not going to say if you submit a design document and we don't have document, or if it's for something on the roadmap and we don't have use cases, we're not going to come back and say, hey, wait for use cases.
That's a great point, Nolan.
Put that out there.
Excellent point. We always encourage people to submit design documents. We also encourage anyone to suggest additional use cases so that even if they're not tied to an epic that's in scope for a release, we want to make sure that we give you a platform to voice, those designs and to bring up any use cases in whatever format, you prefer, design first or use case first. And then we'll work to get them scoped into releases. Also, on the topic of the design doc, also want to make sure, the use cases are, like Nolan said, the what, and as far as the how, in terms of how the community recommends use cases or design docs can be solved, is something we definitely always want to keep open as well.
All right. So Stephanie, you want to do a deep dive into this? Do you want to share your screen or?
I'm okay if you want to share.
Sure.
The link, actually the link that was provided right next to that section, I think goes to the comment. Yeah, and then we just need to go down to use case 7. I think it's further down here. Yeah, I wanted to take a look at the comment version though, share my screen, if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. All right, so let's see, for use case 7, let me pull this up. All right. So we had a use case documented that was related to unquiescing and quiescing of data backup. And I wanted to let the team know, we had a couple of comments here. It seems like there was some feedback as to the clarity of the use case itself. And I had a discussion with one of the internal VMware teams earlier this morning where essentially the ask is to provide quiescing at the container level for the restore hook. But I wanted to make sure that I brought this up as a point of discussion so that if there's any questions or any additional comments, we can all talk about it here. So Nolan, I saw that you had a couple comments here. Maybe we can start with anything that you've got related to this one.
Can I ask by defining like quiescing at the container level, what I guess what is that looking for? Is that all of the volumes connected to the container? Is that yeah, I guess I'm not sure what quiescing at the container level is necessarily looking for.
Well, I don't want to get too far into the implementation details since we haven't gone through that exercise yet. But essentially what we're looking at is, ensuring that anything that could potentially impede application performance if it's not quiesced is done at the container level as opposed to like the volume level to ensure optimal performance. But that's of course up for debate since this is still an open use case for discussion. And this also may have been resolved to some extent in the design document itself.
Are we talking about the restore hook here or the backup hook?
We're talking about the restore hook. So this does carry a dependency, Dave, and I'm glad you mentioned that with backup operations, that if we did have the restore functions, basically if we had quiescing and unquiescing functions to improve application performance for backup and restore operations, there would be probably a dependency at the backup level to.
So is this the SQL Server team that you're talking to?
It is not the SQL Server team unless that's the task for Kate Bates' team.
Okay, so one of the things I wanted to see us moving towards is, we have like persistent services where we have operator driven applications. And really the application needs to quiesce itself and have some interaction, because going in and trying to figure out which containers to quiesce gets more and more difficult, right? How do you know what the right containers to quiesce are? You just quiesce all of them, you quiesce them kind of randomly. And on the restore path here, I'm not sure what quiescing means. because what we're currently talking about are volume-based backups and restores. So in order to start the pod, in order to start the container, we have to have restored the data. We can't do it the other way around, at least not in the current design. So we're going to restore the data, start the pod, and then quiesce it.
No, you quiesce the data prior to the restore event.
You can't do that.
Okay. Okay.
That just doesn't work. So implementation-wise, the way we're currently doing things, that does not work, I don't think.
Okay, no problem. So Dave, at the app operator level, then in that context, that would be a function independent of Velero, and this could be descoped from the Velero requirements.
Well, it's something that Velero should be able to call, and that was a direction we wanted to go into with, like, say, Astrolabe, where we start looking at more object-oriented
that's what I was trying to get to. Okay, I was just trying to make sure, because this topic came up during the last several community discussions pretty frequently, and the reason I keep raising it and surfacing it is because we want to make sure that we address this use case and that we come to agreement on the community meeting as to whether we scope it as part of any backup improvements tied to restore operations, or if Velero in the future could call an external service and handle it that way. So I think that's great.
I have a little bit comment on that area a little bit, because I think Dave, what the scenario Dave just mentioned is actually restored to a new, when you scale down the, to restore, you first scale down, restore the data on the PVC first, and then you restore the pod, right? So that is one scenario. And then there's another scenario that might require quiesce data, because, for example, if we don't scale down, but we want to restore the data to the original pod that is currently running the application, and the user don't want to scale it down, I don't know whether it's actually possible, but that is something that we are thinking about, was that the customer don't want to scale down their pod, their deployment, but restoring the data live or something like that. In that matter, I try to do that myself, and it doesn't work that way. But that is something that I heard floating on the community about trying to restore a live pod without scaling it down.
Yeah, I think
that's an idea. I don't know whether it works. Yeah.
Well, I think the trick there, so depends on what level we go in. So at the block level, you know, if you have a mounted file system, you have a pod that's running but quiesced. So the application has been asked to quiesce, but the operating system is still running underneath of it. And you have a mounted block volume. And we do like block level restore or overwrite, which we actually don't even have the ability to do that. Like CSI, for example, doesn't allow you to overwrite the data in a volume from a snapshot. But assume that you can do that. If it's attached to the operating system and you go in behind the operating system and start overwriting the blocks on the disk, usually what happens is the operating system crashes, which means you take down not only the pod, but the whole worker node. If you do it at the file system level, you can do it without crashing the OS, but you'll need to restart the application because the data is changing behind its back. And restarting an application in a pod basically means restarting a pod.
I guess the idea is to floating around, but it's more on the file system based PVC. And if the file system base being shared, if you have I think it have a share mode or something like that, then it can be mounted by multiple pods and it can be accessible. But I don't know how many storage vendors out there supporting that mode, because that mode is very dangerous of sharing the same PVC for multiple pods.
I mean, it's not necessarily dangerous. It's just that all the applications sharing the file system have to participate in sharing. So if you have like a distributed database, or not really distributed, but a database that uses shared storage, those pods have to be aware that things are changing. There's usually some protocol, either a network protocol or not.
Yeah, so maybe that is
but
why
if we're not playing
the
in
idea
that, we can't really do it.
That's why
if we take it up a level.
So this to me sounds like we are talking about a scenario where we are trying to give the application that's already running a different set of data from what it already has. Is
That's
that
what I'm
right?
hearing.
So that's a scenario that Velero does not work in, because if Velero detects a workload already exists, it's going to say it already exists and I'm not going to restore it. It's just going to move on.
I think what we could be looking at here is if the application, for example, allows itself to take, if you have a backup, if you have a serialized version of, say, Postgres, right? You have you have PG dump. You can say to Postgres, okay, delete all your tables and restore from this PG dump. And that's something that you can do without, for example, restarting pods. And so that's kind of the direction I see things going in, is getting the application more involved in its backup and restore. It doesn't have to be, but for some of these features like this, the application really needs to be involved because it's the one that understands the data format. It's the one that has to know that it's, that the data format has changed. Otherwise, all you can really do is slam everything back to a crash consistent state and restart the app.
Right. Yeah. And kind of my lengthy comment here is kind of Velero, especially in its current state, is very, very, very ignorant of individual applications. And without applications participating in this via the restore hooks, that's kind of what the restore hook, the backup hooks is a way for someone to allow the application to participate in the backup. It's not super intelligent, but it is a way for them to use stuff like PG dump and things like that. And then restore hooks are a way to give an analog to that. So we can get scripts and other utility programs to participate in the restore process. This is not going to be something that, at least in my mind, the implementation of this, the goal was end of August of this year. I don't know that we'll meet that, but the goal is not going to be like super sophisticated, but the idea is Velero itself is not going to be aware of every single application. So the idea is to have a basic building blocks that the applications can be brought into the Velero restore process.
I think the general idea of the restore hook is not a bad one. I think it's a good idea. It's just that particular use case of like quiescing an application during the restore process I don't think that will work. But I think the other things, the other goals listed here are good things.
I agree. And I just wanted to make sure that we had that clarification and we communicated it. So I think we're all on the same page. Sounds good. Thank you.
I also agree.
All right, handing it back to you, Jonas. Thank you.
There we go, mute. So yeah, awesome. Thank you everyone for the great discussion here. Really, really appreciate it. So we have Dave who wanted to talk about the delete action.
Yeah, and I actually had I had a review that I did like on Friday, but of course I didn't push the publish review button. So our question as we were looking at this was, this is delete action. So this will get called on the whole backup. And I think we were looking for like delete item action so that we get called for each of the items that was part of the backup so that we wouldn't have to go, because if I read this correctly, this would mean we have to go and look inside the backup structure, find all of the things that are ours, and then delete them. Is that right?
That was what I was envisioning. I can share a screen for the I can pull up the just so we can play along at home. Yeah, I envisioned it as a kind of a bucket that this matched against the backup itself, versus a deleting arbitrary Kubernetes objects. That was my original understanding, but so you're thinking this would be a deletion against any object in Kubernetes?
Well, not Kubernetes, but in the backup. So it'd be analogous to like restorEitemAction, right? So restorEitemAction comes to
Right.
us for something that's in the backup and says, hey, restore this.
Okay.
And so I was looking for something that says, hey, this thing's in the backup, delete it.
Gotcha.
So there's a difference in the way so when we are like restoring or backing up, we deal with each item individually. But when we are deleting a backup, it is just basically deleting Velero's knowledge of a backup and not actually deleting the resources. So if deleting a backup meant we go delete all existing resources that are in the backup, then it would make sense to do what you are suggesting. But this DeleteItemAction but the DeleteAction is kind of extending extending the changes somebody would have to make into core Velero to do the cleanup.
And we were just looking for something analogous to the volume snapshot or delete.
Okay. I might have to think about that one a little bit more because I'm thinking, so I'm trying to think here on backup delete. I'm trying to think of the things that it specifically deletes, because I think a lot of so the things I know it specifically deletes are it pulls down any volume snapshots in the volume snapshots JSON.gz file, and then invokes the relevant volume snapshot plugin to call that against the snapshot platform. It will clean up any associated restores in Kubernetes, and any restic. And I think I'm not 100% positive on this because it's been a little bit since I've looked at that code, but I think it just deletes the backup directory in object store, which just gets everything underneath there. So you can just say delete that directory and it's all gone. So
right. I mean, so on restore, we currently have a way to figure out, like, restorEitemAction is supposed to get called for each thing that BackupItemAction has snapshotted, right?
Right. Because in the restore, we loop through everything. I just don't know that we do on delete.
Right.
We
So that would be
don't
the
inspect.
we
don't
going to have to write
inspect
that code in each backup action plugin now.
Yeah.
Or
so
each
this backup
delete action, you mean, or backup? Or
delete action, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So we'd have to write the code to loop through the whole backup looking for our stuff.
That's I think my what I had in my head was that when you receive a backup, you kind of knew exactly what you had, and you could do it. But you're right in that each plugin that had stuff would have to receive everything that was in object storage or the contents of the backup and then iterate through that. So like we may end up having to create some helpers anyway, to say, here's what's in the backup. Okay, this is useful feedback.
Yeah, here I think the expectation for with which the design was written was as a what items you added to the backup, and you create a delete item action, which will call you, and you know what you have to clean up, and you will just do it.
Yeah,
I think
that was
that
my
was the
expectation.
intention. Yeah.
See, the thing is, I don't know what I added to the backup because
Okay.
unless we change, because right now we're getting called as backup item action. So we get called onesie twosies for each one, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have a coherent view of our stuff. I mean, we can certainly tag it and go looking for it, but I just felt like it was parallel to have a delete item action to fit with the other two.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, and the reason I think the reason I wasn't going to do a delete item action was when we were talking, you were talking about not doing Kubernetes resources, but doing like external resources, so things not directly on Kubernetes, but you're going to have at least something that you're tying to. Well, the backup item actions that you're triggering on will be PVCs, right?
Right, but we're going to return you some data, that, for example, keeps track of our snapshot ID.
Okay.
Right, so that's like the CSI driver. I mean, take the existing way the CSI driver works for deletes out, but the CSI driver on backup returns basically a snapshot ID that gets stored in the backup.
Gotcha. So what would you match on as a delete item? So like in your replies to, what would you match that against?
Yeah.
Well, I would think we would. So I'm not exactly sure what's stored in the backup, but my thinking would be that if we had returned data that's stored in the backup that comes from a backup item action, that there should be an option to call a corresponding delete item action with that data. So the volume snapshot is pretty much doing what I'm expecting at the moment, right? You call me to do a snapshot, I say, here's a handle, you say, okay, thanks, bye. And how we handle what's behind that is up to the plugin and the storage system and all the rest of that.
Right.
And then at delete time, you come through and you say, okay, hey, we're cleaning up. We don't need this snapshot anymore. Here's the ID, and whatever you need to do is whatever you need to do. If we're cleaning up Kubernetes resources, that's fine. We're going to S3, that's fine. We're calling Veritas or Google Cloud, who cares, right?
Right. Resource selector. I think that's under shared. So from your backup item action, you are returning
And unstructured, it looks like.
Okay, so you're returning an unstructured, and Velero is just shoving that in the backup. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think, okay, so what we might have to do, I don't want to spend everybody's time reading through the data format, but what we may have to do is this particular one may have to be a little bit more on the technical side in terms of use case, but we might want to say that this is tied, like this particular one may have to crack open the backup.
Yeah, I would expect.
It downloads the backup and iterates through each thing in there.
Yeah.
But it already does that, right? I mean, well, no, okay, because you have volume snapshots are called out as special.
Right.
Yeah,
those are stored next to the tarball.
Yeah.
So we could also add backup item actions into their own, generic file. Right. Here's all the things we backed up with backup item action. Since there's no need for backwards compatibility, right?
So here's another thing to kind of extend it further. Would it be, how about we allocate a specific directory in the backup tarball for the plugins to write to? So for example, like Velero writes the volume snapshots.gz file. We give we let the plugins write their own files into the backup. And then at the time of backup, when we we invoke the delete item action, the plugin knows what it read, what it wrote to that particular to its space in the backup, and goes and cleans it up.
Yeah, so that's an option there. Though it's probably good to control. I mean, having the framework, the overall Velero say you did a backup item action. Therefore, if you have a delete item action, I'll call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So given that we didn't, so say for example, we were at DeleteAction as it currently stands. So how would we be able to scan through and find our resources? We'd have to, can we download the backup from there? Is that already, everything's in that?
Yes. If we see, we look at backup file format, it would be not in the JSON file, but inside of the tarball. So if you do Velero,
Sure.
yeah, if you do Velero backup download, you'll see this structure, but inside of it, it's resources, and then it's under that.
So for like a DeleteAction plugin as it currently stands, we get in a backup structure. And that is not the deserialized backup, but it would point to, for example, the backup tarball. And
the backup I was thinking you would receive is actually this, like the literal Kubernetes backup object, not the whole tarball. But we could flip that and say you receive the whole thing. I mean, we could,
right. I mean, that's just, it's just, I mean, it sounds like that's what I need. So if we go down this path, I would have to write the stuff that would, for example, call the object store plugin to download the backup file, untar it someplace. So I need some temporary space.
Yeah.
Then step through it and look for the pieces. So that seems like a lot.
Right.
So I would say that if we could go down the path of, parallel to volume snapshot, where we start to keep the list of things that were backed up with BackupItemAction, and that's a simple, concise list, then you don't have to pull the whole tarball down and crack it on the delete side.
Yeah.
Or Velero could download the tarball onto the disk and tell the plugin, hey, this is where you can find your backup, and the plugin would go inspect the particular folder or directory it wrote to, and if it is there, it'll act on it. If it is not there, and say, hey, I have nothing to do, and exit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think the delete action, I mean, at the same level. So we currently have like a backup action, restore action, delete action. Would that be like that level is at the very top? So these are like, can we do, well, actually we don't, I mean, we can't replace backup action right now, can we?
Backup item action?
No, backup action. So you've got delete action as acting on the whole backup.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like it seems reasonable to have a delete hook that gets called in general when a backup gets deleted.
Right. That's kind of what I was writing it as.
Yeah. But we're going to write an awful. We're going to each when we're trying to clean up after backup item action, we're going to have to add a lot of code for each of those delete item action equivalents.
That makes sense. So, so I think what we need to do is revisit this and probably write some use cases here to say what we need is that we want delete item action here, and maybe we table delete action for now, because it really sounds like your use case is delete item action. You want something.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we need. We need to clean that
Yeah.
stuff up.
I mean, delete item action could be implemented in terms of delete action. It's just annoying and everybody's re-implementing it.
Yeah.
Right.
And, but I get what you're saying, and it would be nice if Velero had some sort of what am I trying to say? Some sort of index of what plugins created. So that's like these backup item actions made these things.
Yeah,
so that,
I guess that currently no one else has really done backup item action plugins, right? Everybody's been concentrating on volume snapshotter plugins.
Red Hat's done some. The CSI, I think the pattern that we're doing has been the vSphere plugin and CSI plugin now. To use backup item actions as a replacement for the volume snapshotter.
Yeah.
The CSI plugin was kind of the first to use that pattern. And Steve kind of prototyped that as a, hey, what if? And we just kind of got lucky that we could use the CSI drivers to do the deletion there by deleting the CSI resources. But in this vSphere case, we can't do that. So yeah, I think what we can do is maybe start by defining some use cases, and then specifically this item action, and maybe see if we revisit see if we need to make any changes to these restore item action interfaces, or any bookkeeping we might need to do that could shortcut this. I don't know if we could take the current proposal and just say, hey, here's the tarball plus an index.
I mean, the thing about, well, I mean, so we can do that, and then we can move code up later, right? But we're basically, we're going to wind up implementing delete item action somehow.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, if we get the global one, we can implement the specific one in terms of that, and then clean it up. It's not great.
Yeah, so if we do that, then so I think there's two options on the table. One is pull down the whole tarball, untar someplace, and then rummage through it for stuff to delete. And that works without any format changes. And then it would be an optimization to add like a look-aside table of here's things that are specific for this plugin to delete.
Yeah.
But it's not really, it's more of an optimization, right? I mean, as long as we have enough disk space, the tarballs are not that big. So it's not a huge burden to download and run through it.
I think it depends if you have restic data in there.
That's not in the tarball, is it?
No. No, that's beside it. Like we look at I should have some backups up here. If it'll load.
It's under a different folder called restic.
Right. Yeah, it's in a completely separate folder.
Yeah.
No. Like the tarball should be. Yeah. So there's restic, and then there's backups, and then backups look like this. So we've got the CSI stuff is in its own .gz. The snapshots are in their own little JSON.gz. The backup itself is right here.
So how did the CSI stuff wind up in its own file? I mean, I obviously built it, but where does that get built from?
That gets built from inside of core Velero so that we can upload them and do it on sync, so we can like synchronize it across the clusters.
Right.
Except
Yeah,
core Velero, nothing else
that's
has
a core.
access to the storage.
Yeah,
Backup
that's a
storage.
core Velero thing. We did that partially because we wanted to be able to do Velero describe commands that could see it and see backups. Like within your backups, do you have CSI snapshots?
Yeah.
Okay. So we probably want to generalize that later on as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These poly volume backups, that's like restic information.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yes, it's possible we can put parallel information in here. And I think Steve had added a plugin directory that could go in backups, in the backup directory.
No, it is in separate.
It's separate? It's at the root?
Well, there's plugins, and that was supposed to be where we could store our data. So
Right.
like
that was on the
we keep the volume
container, right?
data there.
Hey, folks.
But that's not uploaded, right?
Yeah, we're close to the end. So
Yeah, I just want to
we
make
should stop.
here.
Yeah.
We should stop here. But to understand the format, that's kind of what it looks like. But okay, we can probably schedule a separate session for that too.
Yeah.
So I'll stop my share and let Jonas take over.
That's good. Yeah. Please schedule another meeting, and we can have that be a public discussion as well. I think that'd be great. I just want to two things. So first one is, of course, a reminder to let us know if you're using any Velero code that is being mentioned in the Velero public API issue that is pinned to the top of all the issues. If you head over to the Velero repo, click on issues, that would be the pinned issue. So let us know if you have any, if you are relying on any of the Velero code in there, because we are changing things. The last item are the community shoutouts. Do you want to do those, Nolan?
Sure, let me find my way back to that tab. First, want to thank Phuong for testing out stuff on the main branch and finding out we needed to get updates for the 1.5 release ready. So that resulted in an issue, just reminding us. We need to get the update document ready. So thank you very much for playing around with that and reminding us we need to do that. Also, thank you to Kathy Peony for adding this new backup validation failure total metric. Next, thank you to FVSQR. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to pronounce this, but for basically digging into some failures on pulling down logs from storage grid, basically finding some issues with double gzipping on storage grid and fixing that. Also, thank you to Lavria, I think Andrew is his actual name, for updating the Kubernetes dependencies to 1.18. I know 1.19 is around the corner, so we'll need to do this again very quickly, but this was one that touched a lot of stuff. So thank you very much for doing this. Also, thank you to Brian Rowe 92 for updating the documentation on the GCP plugin with the bucket parameter. And lastly, thank you to Stephen Ware for adding this support for incremental snapshots of Azure disks. This is pretty cool and allows for incremental snapshotting support on Azure. And this does work if you take an incremental snapshot and then do a full restore. So for users of Azure, this is pretty cool and can save you some money.
Awesome. Thank you, Nolan. And thank you, everyone, for contributing and being a part of the Velero community. You are all amazing. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week here. If you need anything, please hit us up on the Kubernetes Slack in the Velero channel. And with that, have a fantastic rest of the week, everyone, and see you all next week.